There's a question almost every folk hero and major comic book character with a gallery of rogues and villains often faces. An existential query of morality and responsibility that asks a simple question. Are your enemies truly wicked of their own right? Or did you have a hand in making them that way? More often than not, this is a question asked of Batman, Spider-Man, and traditional costume heroes. It's almost a thought experiment that the notion of a good guy, by default, invites the rise of bad guys. For Scrooge McDuck, it's a question that's going to ask him to rethink his own history and force him to decide who and what he's truly responsible for. This is the life and crimes of Scrooge McDuck. One of my favorite gags in Disney's new DuckTales series is how often it teases us with adventures that we don't ever see. A lot of stories in this series start off in the middle of or just after an adventure that could have easily stood on its own in an episode of the original 1987 DuckTales series. This story is no exception, opening on an action sequence of the family running from a pack of monsters that look like a cross between a gremlin and a tribble from Star Trek. It is, appropriately, called a gribble, and it's a creature Uncle Scrooge got for Louie to teach him responsibility. But like a tribble, it multiplied in droves, and Louie, as always, learned the wrong lesson.
Louie, I got you a pet to teach you about responsibility. Didn't you read the instructions on how to take care of them?
Obviously I didn't, which is good because he multiplied, and now I can sell these monsters as exotic pets.
It's a fun opening and a look at a traditional cartoon adventure story that you might have seen on the classic DuckTales show. But it's not actually what this episode is about. The Gribbles are just here to set up a larger theme for the episode and push Louie and Uncle Scrooge into the mansion's entryway, where the real story begins.
Scrooge McDuck?
Yes?
Oh, you've been summoned.
Don't you mean served?
No.
Instead, Uncle Scrooge is being put on trial. Doofus Drake and Scrooge's greatest villains have joined together to put Scrooge on trial for supposedly creating his enemies. And if this karmic court decides against him, he could lose everything.
Mr. Drake is seeking payment in the form of his fortune, all land holdings, and his treasure!
He's going after the money? What kind of sick game is this?
Each enemy makes a case for why Scrooge's selfish actions made them the villains they are today, claiming that he bears responsibility for all of their bad deeds. Flintheart Glumgold, for instance, claims that when Scrooge swept in and beat him to a treasure he was hunting with a TV crew way back in 1987, it ruined his reputation, and that Scrooge stole the love of the people that would have kept Glomgold from turning into a villain.
In a sudden, shocking turn, Flintheart Glomgold has revealed his stupidity and cowardice. Are we going to be seeing a more heroic side? A sort of altruistic adventure capitalist?
That has a nice ring to it.
That said, it's kinda hard to argue that Glomgold was turned evil by this one action by Scrooge. After all, he'd already stolen from Scrooge in the past as Duke Baloney, and he's kinda built an entire persona around getting revenge.
I mean, he's planting dynamite under Scrooge's chair right now.
Ma Beagle testifies that Scrooge forced her into a life of crime by exposing her pappy, who was running an arm wrestling scam in the old days of Duckburg. And by exposing the scam, Scrooge won the deed to the town. And while Scrooge is a little rude about how he wins the day and exposes that scam, exposing a villain isn't exactly a strong argument for being at fault for creating that villain or other villains. And naturally, the argument just doesn't hold up.
I can't believe you.
Lost?
Got caught!
Aha! Ma Beagle was already rotten. Doofus's case doesn't hold water.
When it comes to the grievances of Magica De Spell, however, Uncle Scrooge seems genuinely embarrassed and worried about her arrival in the courtroom. And to be honest, he should be. Magica De Spell's case doesn't argue that Uncle Scrooge made her a villain. In fact, it proves from the very beginning that she was plenty evil long before she met Scrooge McDuck, showing us her early days where she's ruling over a rural village with her twin brother Poe. Together, the twin sorcerers use their powers to demand treasure from the people of the town, and would cruelly turn them into animals for little more than their own weird amusement. And so, it's clear that Scrooge didn't make a villain out of Magica De Spell. But her story does show a heartlessness and a dark streak in Scrooge's heart that doesn't exactly paint him as a hero either. Scrooge's part in Magica's story doesn't start off so bad. A shadow army drags Uncle Scrooge to Magica and Poe's domain by his number one dime, and Scrooge vows to defeat the twins and take their ill-gotten treasure for himself. Not rescue the town, mind you, but claim the treasure. In the struggle, Magica tries to turn Uncle Scrooge into a crow, but thanks to his number one dime, the spell backfires, and Magica's brother jumps in front of the spell to protect his sister. And Magica doesn't know how to turn him back.
Come on, you know I don't know how to turn people back. I'm sorry, all right? Just put the amulet on and change back into my brother.
Despite how evil Magica already showed herself to be in this scene, her desperation over realizing that she's just lost the person most important to her in the world feels viscerally real. This moment is an incredible performance by Catherine Tate. It transcends Magica's faults so authentically. You actually kind of believe that if she was shown some sympathy and that someone helped her get her brother back, she might even change her ways. But she doesn't get that sympathy or help.
Please, help! He's flying away!
Sorry, a bit busy at the moment.
You could have stopped him!
Well, that'll teach you to tussle with Scrooge McDuck.
It's a stunningly heartless moment from Scrooge. And while it's true that Magica gave him very little reason to show sympathy, his gloating and mockery in the moment is unforgivably cold. To make matters worse, when Louis asks Scrooge at the end of the presentation if he at least gave back all the treasure to the town, he learns that Scrooge didn't, and that he further profited off of their pain and tragedy.
Most of them were goats at that point, but I did spend some of the money to buy them a farm.
And?
And then I used the farm to sell their milk.
Truth be told, it's not a good moment for Scrooge. Each testimony in this trial shows a darker part of his personality than we're used to seeing. He shows an overt pride that drives him to show up Flintheart Glumgold, an egotistical air of judgmental superiority over the so-called lowlifes reigning over a young Duckburg, and a downright vindictive, mean streak of refusing someone begging for help and, worse, gloating over their grief.
This is all your fault!
Me?
You're the powerful sorceress.
It may be true that he's never wronged anyone who hadn't wronged him first, but in some ways, that philosophy of revenge makes him no better than the villains who stand before him. And even if Uncle Scrooge isn't at fault for creating the motley mob of miscreants before him, Louis can see that a life of making enemies is no way to live.
Doofus, I don't want to start an endless rivalry like Scrooge did. Life is too short. And while you may be a freaky, weird, entitled monster kid, I'm still sorry for any pain that I caused you.
It's arguable that Doofus Drake's failings are no more Louis' responsibility than Scrooge's villains' faults are his. But that also doesn't mean that everyone in the situation was treated fairly. Louis may not be taking responsibility for who Doofus Drake is, but he can still take responsibility for his own actions, and recognize that even if Doofus ultimately made his own problems, Louis can still apologize for whatever his part of it might have been. And sometimes, for some people, hearing the sympathy and even a simple apology can be enough.
Thank you, Llewellyn. Ugh, what is this weird, soft feeling?
That is the relief of taking responsibility.
After seeing his own actions laid before him, and clearly being embarrassed by the worst of them, Uncle Scrooge follows Louis' example, apologizing for his part in making his enemies' lives worse.
I don't want to be defined by the mistakes I made, but rather by the humility of admitting them to all of you. I'm sorry.
And then the episode gets a little weird. Although Scrooge didn't exactly admit to creating his enemies, the Karmic Court decides that by apologizing at all, he's accepting the full responsibility for who they are, and the bailiff awards them his entire fortune.
Flintheart Glomgold, Ma Beagle, and Magica De Spell are respectively entitled to Scrooge's fortune.
This is a extremely sudden turnaround, and it feels like the beginning of a major crisis. Scrooge McDuck's fortune instantly, somewhat unfairly, being stolen. Duckburg now under the reign of the Beagles, officially and legally, and his number one dime in the hands of Magica De Spell, an artifact which she'll surely use to unleash another Shadow War, or worse. Except in moments, all of these threats vanish.
He created you, but you might say you created him too.
You moron!
Louis steps up with one last argument, that if Scrooge's enemies were changed by him, he was in turn changed by them. Glumgold's rivalry brought Scrooge out of seclusion and saw him start a new life as a so-called adventure capitalist. Criminals like the Beagles taught Scrooge to stay one step ahead of the scammers and tricksters, and realizing his mistake in not helping Magica made him a more humble man today.
So if they're entitled to what's his, he's therefore entitled to the same level of justice.
If everyone in every situation influences everyone else, and that impact that they have on each other's lives goes both ways, can anybody really be responsible for creating anyone else? It's an argument that makes a lot of sense, but it also comes really fast, quickly reversing what felt like was going to be a major turning point in a larger story. And that makes me wonder, what if it wasn't supposed to end that way? What if that turnaround wasn't supposed to happen? Ever since we learned that DuckTales was ending, it's been hard not to overthink what these stories have been trying to tell us. The DuckTales crew said that Season 3 was supposed to be about legacy, but they told us that before we knew that the third season would be the show's last. Maybe they told us that before they knew the third season would be the show's last. And if they did, that means that Season 3 might have changed halfway through production, and this story might not have ended the way it did. I can't say if that's true, but moments like the end of the life and crimes of Scrooge McDuck do make me wonder. For a season that was designed to be about legacy, a series of stories exploring the Disney Afternoon universe and establishing a new solidified canon for Scrooge and his nephews, and showing what their life was like with Della reunited with them, Scrooge losing everything in a completely devastating way, only for that family to come together and earn it back in a finale, seemed like a season end that would make a lot of sense. And the power of an otherworldly, supernatural Karmic Court kicking off a giant story like that feels like a genuine start to a season closer that would be perfect if a Season 4 was still coming. But it isn't. Instead, this episode ends with a quick lesson and a fast return to the status quo. It's completely possible that this is how the story was always planned to end, but a small part of me wonders if this quick conclusion is the result of the show's own impending conclusion. A stopgap to skip over a different original Season 3 finale that might have been written in order to let us skip ahead to the face-off with Fowl that might have otherwise been reserved for a Season 4 storyline. It's not hard to imagine that possibility, even if I have no idea if it's true. Either way, we won't have to wait long to find out. Louis' final argument works and closes out this story in the same episode it began. The stage is set for the series finale. I'm hesitant to speculate too much on the end of DuckTales, apart from my idea that maybe the finale will give us an idea of what we might have seen if there was a Season 4. Well, that, and that if Seasons 1, 2, and 3 were about Dewey, Louie, and Huey, maybe Season 4 was supposed to be, and now the series finale is, something that can focus a little bit more on Webby. I have my own ideas for how that might go down, but I won't say them here. Either way, we won't have to wait very long to find out, and whatever happens, it's bound to solve a mystery and rewrite some history. That's all for now, though. Thank you again for sticking with me through this project for so long. It's been a unique joy, and I can't wait to see what comes next for DuckTales, its amazing crew of animators, and the community of friends I've made making these videos over the last few years. I'll see you next time for the DuckTales season finale. The DuckTales series finale. Take it easy, Internet.